Hey, this lesson is going to be an overall code review. So we started out by creating a project where we have some data within a spreadsheet, and we want to be able to interact with that data within our web application, so on our website. So within this application, we've got a spreadsheet, and we want to get all of the contents of the spreadsheet out to the web page first. So that was the first objective, so that we could load the contents neatly into our web page. And this is all coming from the live data within the spreadsheet. So we created a web app that was using the do-get, so getting the spreadsheet ID, connecting using the spreadsheet app service, and selecting the sheet that we want to use, getting all of the values, selecting out the header information, and then also slicing out all of the rows of information, so they could be questions or content or whatever we want to call it, and then setting up a basic holder that we can add data into, so we can add the objects into as we iterate through all of the items that we have within the sheet, so we can have questions or whatever we want. So going through, looping through them, and then also looping through the headers as we loop through, because we've got a number of headers. And the objective was really just to make it as dynamic as possible, so even if we update some of the content within the spreadsheet, it's not going to break our application, and we don't have to do any redeployments. It's going to work seamlessly and independently. So then we built the holder object and then output that as JSON data. So we turned it into a string and then output the contents into the web page. And that's this content here. So it created an endpoint that we can connect to from our web application and then use that information that we've got within the JSON and then build what we want to represent on the web page. So then we went into the HTML. We created a basic container to output the content to, and then also connected the JavaScript file. Within the JavaScript file, we've got our URL, so that's our endpoint of our web application. We selected the container. We have a function that makes the fetch request, gets the data, and that loops through, makes a request to the URL, returns back the data as JSON. When we get the data back, then we iterate through the data. We build the HTML DOM content, the elements, and then we also add interaction to the element buttons. So this is all just done with JavaScript, creating a function that's going to pick up whatever element is being clicked, and then sending the data into the element. And then lastly over here, we've got another function that does and creates form data, appends the newly created form data that we've sent in and structures it to send over to the Google script. We make a fetch request, picking up the form data on post. We get the response back from the server, and then we make use of the response information and we update the page contents. So going back into the Google script, we created a doPost function, and the doPost function was the function that we're posting to from the fetch request from the web application using JavaScript. So selecting the new value and passing that in to the update sheet. The update sheet is just the method that we were using. And one of the reasons to break up the functions is that this is going to be a lot easier to test. So you could just pass in some data and simulate the post in order to do testing. So if you have to make some update to it, it's a whole lot easier than having to constantly redeploy. And also, as we saw, there's a number of CORS errors that the web application will throw if there's any kind of structural problems within the web app. So it's a whole lot easier to debug it with separate functions. So creating a function, getting the data in, we parse it in as a JavaScript object because it's coming in as a string, and then we get the ID of the sheet. We select the sheet that we want to update, and then the next part of it is selecting the column and the row, which will give us the range on the sheet that we want to update. So it's just the one cell. So we're looking at a way to select the sheet cell, and we just need a row and a column for that. So we get it into a range object. We convert the current value into a number. We increment it by 1, and then we reset the new value of that ranged element and return back the new value, which then in turn gets returned back to the web file as a string value. So it says using JSON, returning that information back into our web application and ultimately updating with whatever the new value is. So we see that being returned back as value. So it just overwrites the existing data with the new value. And then that also corresponds to whatever values we've got within the sheet. If you have any questions or comments, I'm always happy to hear from you. And source code is included, so I do suggest that you try the code out for yourself. Create your own version of the application, have some fun with it. Also update the sheet data, challenge yourself with some different columns, different data, and presenting the content as needed within the client side of your web application. Thanks again for taking the course and taking this section.